Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. I'm Paulo Vieira da Cunha, and I'm director at the Brazilian American Chamber in New York. It's really a great pleasure to be with you today in such a distinguished panel. You may think that a digital currency is somewhat of an esoteric topic, but the reality, as I'm sure and I hope it will become clear during this webinar, this is an innovation that can have a profound impact on financial markets and in the lives of consumers and anyone that interacts with the credit system. So it is indeed a major innovation, and we should congratulate the Central Bank of Brazil for being in the forefront of taking this initiative, as they have done in others that are really admirable, including the PIX system and measures that have really democratized access to finance to the Brazilian population.
I'd like to thank the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce for this invitation. It's an honor. Thank you, Paulo, personally, for putting this together. And let me salute Fabiana and Fernando. I think that we'll have a tremendously interesting discussion. The central bank then, back as early as 2014, started to try and coordinate the industry so that the industry would lead an initiative for fast payments, which, by the way, at that point, were already springing out in different places, such as UPI in India and the Switch in Scandinavia. And at that point, and when we talk about credit cards, debit cards, electronic billing, different types of wire transfers, for instance, payroll transfers, we're talking about, let's say, bank money in a certain sense, okay? We are not nearly close to what a CBDC would be, which is a liability of the central bank, in fact. So these are all liabilities from some type of financial institution. It may be a payment institution, which is an institution that does only payments, provides only payment services, doesn't do the whole bundles and say credit and investment. Now, the idea, as I interpret it, is that the central bank wanted the industry, the ecosystem. What I mean by the ecosystem: banks, which are the issuers of credit cards or debit cards or payment institutions, the payment arrangements, and the acquirers to get together and try and promote and lead this fast payment initiative. For reasons that I don't have time to get into, I think we had a significant coordination challenge here, which led the central bank to decide to lead and be for lack of a better word, Fabio is going to be mad at me, to be the owner of the payment system that would be the fast payment system, which is now PIX. Now, PIX is, think of PIX in the US. In the US, for analogy with the US, think of PIX as very fast, very cheap wire transfers, but very fast and very cheap wire transfers that have multiple use cases. Meaning that you could use a wire transfer to pay your cab. Or you could use a wire transfer to pay pay the restaurant, to pay a purchase online, or to pay your employees. PIX is still bank type money. It has this characteristic that is digital and it's instantaneous. So and Pix was a major success. Like I would say that it's a world-class case. So at this point, we have this very widespread use of a digital, instantaneous form of bank-type money. And then the central bank, I think, found itself in a position, well, what should we do? I think, should we use something next? And I think the decision was then, you basically had the infrastructure and the knowledge to push ahead and have a sort of payment arrangement which is digital, and it's a liability of the central bank. In a certain sense, it's not conceptually different from physical money. Physical money is a liability of the central bank. You could think of this as physical money tokenized. But when you open this road, you have a lot of other opportunities that you can do on top of this, let's say, tokenized central bank money.
Thank you, Paulo. Thank you, Manuel. Thanks to the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce for this opportunity for discussing the CBDC project in Brazil. I think that open finance and the framework that we are making for open finance here in Brazil, together with Drax, with our digital currency, is going to be a way to achieve financial inclusion and democratization in financial services here in Brazil. Then just to go now into some of the details. One important discussion for the central bank is, okay, now I have the possibility of making my liability in a digital format that can be accessed by the population. That would be a retail CBDC. And that brings lots of concerns, macroeconomic concerns. And most of the central banks are studying that and considering whether that would be a good way to proceed, or whether you should stay in the wholesale space to use CBDC for more general purposes. From the beginning of the project here in Brazil, we wanted to make sure that services would reach the hands of the population. Then it's a CBDC project focused on retail services. But there is this tension, this trade-off between bringing the CBDC to the hands of the population and pushing the bank into a narrow banking situation. And that's a very concerned outcome for most central banks, and that's also for Central Bank of Brazil. With that in mind, we launched the test lab. We made a call to the stakeholders and said, okay, there is this new technology. It's very promising. We would like to make financial services for the population. What would you like to make out of this technology? Then this lab was called Lift Challenge. We received 47 proposals for different parts of the industry, DeFi participants, CeFi participants, TradFi, and if I'm going too much into the super flares, there is the decentralized finance operating in blockchain, centralized finance operating in blockchain also, and TradFi, that would be a traditional financial sector. Companies from all these areas joined to make proposals, and we selected 9 projects to try these technologies to make sure that it was worth pursuing these use cases, and if it was feasible to use a CBDC in the Brazilian economy. Out of these 9 projects, we had 2 decentralized finance projects, three delivery versus payment products, one PVP for exchange of funds between Brazil and Colombia, one for programmable money, one for IoT, Internet of Things, and one for do offline payments. We had the opportunity to discuss several different aspects of a CBDC ecosystem, and we've learned two main lessons in this first lab. One is that it's not necessary to have a retail CBDC to make sure that the population has access to digital services. If you have a good regulated private money, that's good enough. That solves lots of problems, including the narrow banking problem. Then we decided to go to a two-tier architecture where there is a wholesale CBDC used by the authorized entities in the market, and a private digital currency that would be a tokenized version of deposits or of balances in payment accounts that could be used to access the services in this digital platform. Another lesson that we took out of that was that privacy is not a thing that is very well treated in this space, not yet at least. In Brazil, we have the general data protection regulation, similar to the one that is in place in Europe. We have the Bank Secrecy Act here in Brazil too. And we need to design a system that is compliant to this regulatory aspect. The central bank doesn't wish to have a special privacy set up for a CBDC. We have already discussed with the Brazilian society what's the desired level of privacy, what is the desired level of tools for AML and for preventing the finance of terrorism and other activities. Then we think that the CBDC should try to fit in into this decisions that the society made already, and we are running tests right now with the pilot, with the Drax pilot that started in March this year, to make sure that we can put together a platform that can assure the general data protection regulation and the bank secrecy here in Brazil and other applicable privacy regulations that we have for the Brazilian market. Apart from this pilot that is running right now, we have 16 groups of companies involving more than 70 different companies, banks, credit unions, fintechs, crypto native companies, tech companies as Microsoft or Visa also is engaged, payment companies and think tanks. We have a group of different players discussing this ecosystem, and by May next year, we have this deadline to finish the test on privacy, so we can open up for other use cases for testing with the society.
Thank you, Paulo. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation by the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce. CBDCs are central bank digital currencies. They are state currencies. So they really are a subtype of the first concept that we brought here, which is the state currency. But they are digitally native. So instead of being issued and being on a cover on the central bank's garage or whatever it is at the central bank, they are native. They are basically deriving or getting their birth from the very core technology that brought to us the cryptocurrencies or stable coins. So obviously Fabio can get into more details about the technology and how you get the system to create a stable coin, the CBDCs, but essentially they are state currencies, but on a digital form. So they may become a private currency when they are deposited to the central bank. They may become an electronic currency when from the originals at the central bank, they go and be brought to a payment institution to be used as an e-wallet by a client that has a prepaid money. And they may be a pegging to stable coins, and may become easier for a stable coin to actually be governed with a CBDC rather than traditional traditional state currency. So the idea here, as Fabio and João Manuel brought, is to extend inclusion and the ability of technology to be a key and central role in central bank monetary policies and so on and so forth, with delivery versus payment, with interoperability, which is something that I have discussed the last time I was with Fabio on a panel. We defended an article we made to the central bank about interoperability. Interoperability is something that is really important, what I'm going to bring on the next slide. But essentially, the rest of the slide really goes down on what I said. It's a CBDC compared to stable coins have the characteristic of being backed by the state and a legal tender, which brings the CBDCs to be exactly a state currency, but being created in a different form. And if you bring, Fabio touched on that briefly, there are different ways that a CBDC may be created. We have the wholesale CBDC, which in Brazil you don't need because of the fact that, or I would say that the retail CBDC. The retail CBDC is when the central bank directly creates a system that is used by the public. And in Brazil, the need for the system to be created straight as a CBDC is not necessary. It isn't there because of PIX. We already have a very established, or PIX or TED, even the Brazilian payment system from the early 2000s really created the fact that Brazilians don't use checks. If a lot of you guys are in the US, checks are still there to pay rents and so on. Nobody gets a checkbook in Brazil since the early 2000s because of the way that the electronic transfers of money exist and are present, and they have been evolving over the years. So and that essentially brings us to the fact that our CBDC model will be a wholesale CBDC model where you have the central bank distributing the currency through the intermediaries, which are payment institutions and banks, rather than directly setting this up to the public to actually compete with the other traditional payment networks, which is the case in other countries such as Canada. In the panel, we had the Central Bank of Canada with us, and the studies that they brought was the fact, alluded to the fact that they needed, for competition purposes, what they call a retail CBDC system. So our Brazilian is what they call the wholesale CBDC system. So here's the guidelines Fabio already touched on, issuance of the Brazilian, the DREX, the Real Digital, is a payment method to support other offer of financial products such as DVP and tokens, and really touching on the tokenization of the economy. It's a DLT solution based on technology and really being something that really plays along with the Basel and international BIS ideas. Just to finalize, to bring something that is very important in our view is and the central bank really pays a lot of attention into this very topic, which is the interoperability of CBDC systems. As I mentioned, the CBDCs, they have something similar to crypto assets, the way they are born. They have infrastructures that are native, and then the discussion becomes how to interoperate these different infrastructures, especially when you touch on traditional legacy infrastructures that you have for something else, such as the FX systems and even the payment systems in a country. And then when we talk about interoperability, it's really how you're going to insert the CBDCs into something that exists. So the second topic is how they interoperate. They interoperate with other non-CBDC systems, which is the traditional payment systems. For instance, in Brazil, we have PIX, TED, DOC has gone, but we keep there for historical purpose. But how we're going to insert the CBDCs into the traditional payment rails that exist already in Brazil, and how they deal with CBDC systems around the world. And then you have the different models for which, if you play it forward, we may be seeing here a true revolution in FX. Because if we interoperate CBDC systems from different nations, we might have a situation in which the cryptocurrencies try to solve, and they say a use case was to create faster payments cross-border, but CBDCs may be the way to do that because they interoperate from the Brazil system with the US, with the UK system. through a model that it might be different models, but compatible models with minimum compatibility features. They can be interlinked model where they are actually linked through international rails, the same way Swift is, if using a comparison, or they may be, which I don't think it's going to be the case, a single system that all CBDCs migrating to a single international system. Today, it doesn't seem close to happen, but we might be seeing something in between the compatible interlinked model soon, and another use case in addition to local interoperability. But really, you're going to see here maybe a revolution in FX where CBDCs play a key role here.
Thank you very much, Paulo. And I'm glad to be part of this panel. I think it's a very important subject at the moment and the future as well, because as you know, the financial service environment in Brazil, it's so rich in terms of innovations, new requirements, and everything that you need to achieve. I think to connect a little bit what I explained here, I'm as part of digital auditing, what I look, of course, something digital, and you talk a lot about technology here. Technology is an important part, as everyone knows. You don't survive in your days without GPS and the other technologies that you have. But in terms of banking and the services that you provide, I can tell you that the behind the scenes, when I'm talking about my retail banks client, or when I'm talking about my insurance companies and the others, electronic payments, so on, I see about what they have in terms of controls to ensure that everything will be connected and it work properly. I always looking for risks. It's terrible to say that, but in the end, when I look for the risk in the environment, I'm trying to find the right key control that you mitigate that risk. So when you're talking about new technology here, I can point a few items that at Retail Bank and the other members of this pilot, the future entities that will be in compliance and be participants of this new currency, they needed to be in compliance with. Like give example, we talk a lot about the data, you be electronic, and you have the controls about security, right? And one of the risk also is, despite the risk that I have inside of the companies and the banks, etc., I have the risks in the environment. Cybersecurity risk, it's a risk that day by day is becoming more and more higher. Because in the end of the day, let's say that people are very creative to find some opportunity to take advantage of the system. So when you look at what the companies need to do, the members that you participant of the DREX, they needed to make sure about the governance of your control environment. As a sample, they needed to ensure that they have the right access controls of people that involve of change management of the application that you be helped to the tool, né? In the end, the product DREX is being operation. Or also, they needed to ensure that they have the right controls to avoid any vulnerability of the data, because data protections is one of the things that's very important as well, because your data you be in some platform as today, but maybe in more let's say large scale, when you talk about that you needed to be in compliance not only with the rule in Brazil, sometimes depends on the operation outside of the Brazil, because there's some minor difference between the environments. And when you talk technology, you always talk about security, but everything needs to work correctly in the process, because what you do in the end, sometimes you have, let's say, I'd like to purchase a car as a final customer, and I'd like to go for my bank, a specific bank A, that you transfer the money for the person when is selling the car. So between the two banks, you needed to have an interface and, you know, the famous API to ensure that this connection be worked properly, and to make sure that in the end of the day, the transaction will be happening in the time that I need. As PIX today, but in different architecture, because you are using the blockchain and you have the other small things that is very important in the middle of this architecture for this type of currency.
But Fabio, if we consider, for example, today, someone, a consumer, a regular consumer, is going to buy a car, much has been said that if you have the DREX, the way that you can buy a car will change. And I would like to understand how this will change. I mean, how will it be different than someone today going and buying, say, a used car at a dealer in some place in São Paulo? How will the introduction of the DREX make that transaction different? And how will that make it more accessible to more people than what it is today?
Thank you, Paulo. The transfer of cars and real estate, they always call attention because it's a very easy way to explain how things can change. What's the difference in the Drax world and in the contemporary world that we have today for this transaction? Suppose you want to buy a car from a third party that you don't know, a used car, and there is always this moment. Okay, now it's the time for the exchange. We settled everything. I'm gonna pay you X reais, and you're gonna give me the title of the car. And who goes first? Do I pay first, or do I receive the title first? If I pay first, there is this time for that concerns me. Will I receive the title? The guy will disappear with the car, and I just lose my money. One way that we could do today to solve that problem is to hire a lawyer, a third party escrow account. I could give the money for this third party, this escrow account. The third party would receive the title of the good that is being traded, the house or the car. And then when everything is checked, this third party would give me the title and give the money to the person that is selling the car. What's the problem with that solution today? Why people don't do that today? Because that would be expensive for a good, like a car, and then you just take the risk. That's what people do. And when you talk about real estate in the US, most of the states, they require this escrow accounts. They require this legal structure. Then you need to pay for this third party for the transactions. Here in Brazil, that's not mandatory. That's not necessary. For some transactions, when they are very large, you hire someone for doing that job. But that's not necessary. That's not part of the regular transactions, the usual transactions that people do here. Then once again, people incurring risk, and they just try to go by and, okay, I will make the payment and I will receive the title afterwards. What PIX do in these two cases is to promote in fact, delivery versus payment without the risk of the counterpart. And it's very easy for everybody to understand.
Thank you, Fabio. I think that on that note, it's a good moment to conclude. Thank you again for all the panelists that were part of this discussion, and thank you for all of you that have been listening. Goodbye.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day, everyone.